Well,
Well,
hey everyone, I'm Alex Slosby, class of 1996, and I'm excited to continue our initiative telling the stories of graduates who are innovators and entrepreneurs in their fields. And I'm very excited to have Hill Moss, class of 2008, here with me today. Hey, Hill.
hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. So Hill's currently an MBA, MPH candidate at Yale, focused on entrepreneurship in cancer care and women's health. And Hill's got a pretty amazing story from her time at Nobles to Princeton to focusing on the business side of arts and cultural institutions, and then on to business school at Yale, and then to a big turning point in her life, which sounds like it's really influenced her path forward. So I'd like to take a few minutes, hear a bit of Hill's story, and then think about what that means for innovators and entrepreneurs, aspiring ones at school, and then also those who are graduates. So again, Hill, thanks so much. Let's start with your time at Nobles. And when you talked, you shared with me your passion for arts and culture, and it sounds like it really got started or really built on campus with some great relationships. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me, Alex. I really appreciate it. Yeah, at Nobles, I was in every way what you would call a theater kid. I spent a lot of my time in the beginning in Lawrence and then later in the new arts building when it opened in rehearsals, whether that was for Greensleeves, our a cappella group, or for the spring musical. And I think part of what made my experience at Nobles so special was finding that mentorship that is provided I really believe that the faculty at Nobles is really unparalleled. I had such support from Dan Halperin in the theater department and Mike Turner in the music department that really helped me to grow as an artist and as a team member. And I really think set the stage for me to really pursue some of my passions down the line. And so I remain very grateful to the folks at Nobles for that.
It's great. And a funny thing that maybe a lot of folks don't know. So I came into Nobles in the fall of 90 as a 6E, and Mike Turner was the computer guy. So there was a small Mac lab upstairs above the main hallway. And Mike was the guy when I came in, and that was before Steve Bergen and sort of all the tech stuff from that point forward. But maybe folks don't know that he's got a big tech background, or at least a lot. He got things started at least when I was there eons ago. So
I love
it. Yeah. Great folks all along. So that's great. You got that passion started, and then that took you to Princeton, and it sounds like a foray into consulting with arts and cultural institutions. Can you talk a little bit about that, sort of the strategy and innovation consulting side and that work you did for the next few years?
Absolutely. So I left Nobles. I started at Princeton and kind of built on my experiences at Nobles in two ways. In one way, I kept doing a lot of what I was doing in the theater world as a musical theater performer. But I also majored in art history, and that was actually a passion that I developed in my art history class with Betsy Van Oot. So another connection back to Nobles. And in actually my junior year at Princeton, I ended up doing my thesis research in Kampala, Uganda. And while I was there, interned working on a business plan for the development of a major art center there. And it was at that moment that I realized, I have this passion for arts and culture, but I don't know that I actually want to be a performer full time. What if I could use my brain in a different way and really stay involved in this field? And so I found the one consultancy in New York that focused on strategic planning for arts and culture. I emailed them and pestered them constantly throughout my senior year of college until they would take me. And I ended up staying there for 6 years. And so I worked in strategy and innovation consulting, working with cultural organizations like museums and theaters and universities, helping them to expand their impact on their audiences and plan for the future.
Fantastic. Let me ask a bit, just quickly, kind of about that switch to sort of the business side. So all the performance work you did all along, then into consulting, you said sort of working your brain through those challenges. What kind of got you then into consulting and into the business side? Anything more about how you made that switch or decided to make that switch?
Yeah, I think there was this really interesting realization. I think that there was this moment, so that was 2012, when I think arts organizations were really starting to realize that they needed to apply some strategic and business thinking to the way that they were thinking about scaling, thinking about marketing and advertising. But the thing to remember about arts and cultural organizations is that often the leadership has come through an artistic path. So they have either been artistic directors, they've been curators, and therefore they're always more comfortable if the person, helping them from the business side also had an arts background, because it just means you can kind of bridge that gap and speak the language. And so I started to realize, man, I mean, what I'm really interested in theater isn't just being on stage. It's about how it makes me feel and how I know it makes others feel when they're sitting in the audience. And what if I could actually work with organizations to make sure more people have that experience? And consulting, one of the things that's really fun about it is you get to do it with a lot of different cool organizations. And it was a nice way to pop in and out of different areas in the field.
It's great. And I love it because, again, you brought such a passion for the industry, right? It wasn't somebody coming in who, hey, spent a bunch of time in some other field and now they're a consultant. You were able to come in with that same passion. I've got to believe, right, that resonance, that's the kind of thing that builds trust and probably closer collaborations.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. So you did that for a few years. What then sort of clicked in your mind about going and getting your MBA and eventually leading you to Yale?
Yeah, so I had a very specific vision. And that vision was, I love what I'm doing. I'm thinking about strategy and innovation for culture. But I thought, what if I could have an even bigger impact? I really think that the future of culture is going in the direction of broader entertainment, right? There's more democratic access. And I thought, I'm going to go to business school and I'm going to leave and I'm going to work in strategy in like a streaming TV company or something like that, and really try and push the boundaries of what culture is doing and how it's delivered. And that was what I walked into business school with a very clear vision of doing.
So now an amazing piece to your story, which is you got to Yale, you got started, and then what happened?
So I made it about 6 weeks, and it was a great 6 weeks. I went through 2 weeks of orientation with my new MBA class. I had 4 weeks of class. I was loving it. I felt like I had really kind of found my place. And at that 6-week mark, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I was 28 years old. I had no family history, had really never even known that many people who had breast cancer. And it became clear very quickly that school was not going to be on the table for a little while. I mean, as soon as I understood my treatment plan, I was going to need to undergo about 14 months of combination chemo and immunotherapy, 5 surgeries, including a double mastectomy. It was all encompassing. And so I got diagnosed the next day. I packed up my things. I didn't even get to say goodbye to my friends. And I drove to Boston to be treated at Dana-Farber. And as I underwent that patient journey, I started sharing my story. I figured, I can use social media. I'll keep people in the loop on what I'm doing, and maybe I can do some good, right? Like raise a little awareness about breast cancer in young women, maybe, democratize some of this conversation around healthcare. And what happened was I ended up getting more and more involved in this world. And I found this amazing active community of young breast cancer patients and survivors on social media. I started writing, I started advocating. And when I returned to business school in fall of 2019, I was actually still in treatment. I went back and forth for a little bit. I had one of those stereotypical moments where I just realized that my interests had changed. And I love arts and culture. I always will. I stay involved as a volunteer, but that I had just learned too much about the pain points and opportunities in our healthcare system, particularly related to women's health and cancer care, that I knew I had to shift paths.
And just, I mean, amazing, inspirational, and everything you've gone through, and that passion for arts and culture, and then that turning point, and now this passion, and how it seems like it's become sort of such a thread that's leading you forward. How are you sort of thinking about what you're going to do in the space now and where that's leading you next?
Absolutely. So the first thing I did when I made this realization is I reached out to the public health school at Yale and I said, please, will you have me? I would love to make this a dual degree. And it was very important for me. I'm a big believer in really researching and immersing yourself in a topic before you go and, try to make some recommendations or take action in that world. For me, the MPH was really about learning about systems, learning about inequalities, difficulties with access to care. And so I'm really trying to kind of bury myself in that broader understanding of the system. And then what I also do now is in addition to my studies, I serve as a consultant to companies. And so I work with them on what I call patient-centered innovation. It is, basically working with companies to help them understand why there is a business imperative now, particularly now, to really care about the patient experience and to help them understand where the patient pain points are and where these companies can potentially either, think about M&A, think about new product development, to really make strategic decisions that keep the patient in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something about, I think that whole experience. I mean, I remember when my daughter was in the hospital briefly, and they had things up on the walls for pediatric patients where, hey, find that thing on the wall, or, little cartoon things, or they brought in things, right? And so much of that is being patient-centered, not just sort of that functional, how do we care for that patient and treat them, but how do we make them feel a certain way, cared for, right? And treated in the way they'd want to be treated. And so much of that emotional stuff is huge. And right, isn't that, I think that's a big part of the patient centricity.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, part of what we're seeing is with the internet now, with the rise of these patient communities, access to health data and information, individuals are becoming much more active agents in their own care, right? And they really are seeking out an experience that's like the one that you just mentioned, where they feel at home, where they feel listened to, where they feel like their outcomes and, their personhood is really being respected. And I think that more and more companies will come to realize that that has to be a strategic business priority for them.
Yeah, seeing the world through the eyes of your customers, right? Great stuff. So I think as we end, there's of course a lot of students at Nobles who are aspiring to be innovators in large companies or small ones, entrepreneurs in large companies or small ones, and also a lot of grads who might be thinking about what else can they do to do more work in innovation, perhaps go start stuff. Some points of advice. What would you say to the students, fellow grads? So what are some of the things you'd learned and maybe recommendations you'd give as they think about doing more work in innovation and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I think one piece of advice I would give that fortunately a place like Nobles really steers you in the direction of is in your education and early in your career, really spread your net wide. And, I was very focused on the arts, but the great thing about Nobles and the great thing about Princeton was that I was forced to also go outside my comfort zone and learn things that I, at the time, thought would never come into play, right? So for example, at Princeton, we had a quantitative requirement. And for one of those quantitative requirements, I took a intro molecular biology class. And I remember thinking, this will have absolutely zero impact on my life. And now I work in healthcare, and it is probably one of the more important touchstone experiences that I had, right? So I think, I have experienced firsthand that your life can change on a dime, and it doesn't have to be a disease. It could be anything, but even when you think your passion is so clear, it could change. And I think providing yourself with a very broad foundation will just give you the opportunity to take on new challenges and really think creatively.
I think it's fantastic advice. And it's been so great to spend this time with you and to be able to share your story, which is amazing. And I think puts a lot of things in perspective for a lot of people. And folks who are listening, if you're interested, if you've got questions and things, please follow up with Hill. We can provide her email address. And thanks to all of you for your time. Really enjoyed providing this story and helping Hill tell her story, and look forward to sharing more stories of Nobles innovators and entrepreneurs soon. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you, Alex.